Hi everybody, welcome back to Icelandic for Foreigners. In this video I'm going to teach you an important pronunciation principle. This pronunciation rule is a little bit different than some of the others I've done on this channel because it's not absolutely necessary in order for you to pronounce individual words correctly, but it is important if you want to have a more native-like sound to your speech. So let's get into it. The rule is that pronouns beginning with the letters how and Thor have an altered pronunciation in unstressed positions in the middle of the sentence. Now, I know that sounds confusing, but we're going to break it down. So let's start first with which pronouns we're talking about. So first of all, we're talking about the pronouns that start with the letter how. The main ones here are han, honum, and hans, which are he, him, and his. We also have hun, hana, henni, and hennar, which are she, her, and hers. We also have pronouns that start with the letter Thor, and there are a lot more of these. We'll go through them. We have thu, thig, thir, and thin. These are you and your, right, the singular forms. We also have thad, thvi, and thes, which are it and its different forms. We have their, thou, them, and thera, which are they and them, as well as the thair and thoi, which are the feminine and neuter forms. We also have thith, which is you all. And then finally we have thessi, which means this, and all of its different forms. So these are the pronouns we're talking about, and their pronunciation in certain situations is going to change a little bit, and it's going to be different whether we're talking about the pronouns on the left side of the screen or on the right side of the screen. So let's look at the rule for the letter how, or for the pronouns that start with how. The rule is that the how sound, or the h sound, is dropped when the pronoun is unstressed in the middle of the sentence. So let's look at an example. I'm going to read this sentence first as I'm going to read it very carefully with very careful pronunciation. So I'm going to say ég gav honum bókina, which means I gave him the book. So that's when I'm enunciating very clearly. But in normal everyday speech, we're going to apply this rule, which says that we're going to drop the how sound out of the word honum because it's unstressed and it's in the middle of the sentence or not at the beginning of the sentence, which means we're going to pronounce it more like this. Ég gaf honum bókina. Ég gaf honum bókina. I gave him the book. So the way that we're doing this is we're dropping the H sound and we're combining those two words as if they're one word. Now, this doesn't prevent you from pronouncing it clearly by saying ég gaf honum bókina. That will always be correct. But in casual everyday speech, you're going to combine those two words, ég gaf honum bókina. Now this changes if we want to emphasize or stress that we're giving him the book. In that case, we're not going to drop the H because it's being stressed. So we'll say, ég gaf honum bókina, to stress that he is the one who received it. But if it's unstressed, that's when we're going to drop it. So let's look at another example here. The sentence with careful enunciation would be, fór hún heim. Did she go home? Now with this rule applied, we're going to pronounce it fór hún heim. Fór hún heim. Did she go home? Now again, if we wanted to stress hún in the sentence, then we wouldn't drop the H. We would say fór hún heim, right? Did she go home? That's always allowed and it's always correct, but if it's unstressed, then you're going to sound more natural if you drop that H sound. Let's look at a few more examples. Hún sá hann hlaupa means she saw him run. We're going to drop the how in the word hann and say hún sá hann hlaupa. Hún sá hann hlaupa. Now notice we're not dropping the how in the word hún because it's not in the middle of the sentence, it's at the beginning. We're only going to drop the how in hann. Here's another example. Hringdi hann í hana. That's the very careful pronunciation. Apply the rule and it's going to become hringdi hann í hana. Hringdi hann í hana. And we're going to drop the how in both hann and hana. One more example. Hún talaði við hana. She talked to her. Becomes hún talaði við hana. Hún talaði við hana. All right, let's move on to the rule with Thor, which is similar but also different. The Thor sound becomes an eth when the pronoun is unstressed in the middle of the sentence. So we're not going to drop the Thor letter. We're just going to pronounce it as an eth. So here's a classic phrase that's pretty important. Jeg älskar þig, which means I love you. Now in natural pronunciation, this is going to become ég älskar þig. Jeg älskar þig. I love you. And it doesn't prevent you from pronouncing þig with the true thought sound if you want to emphasize it. Jeg älskar þig. I love you. But if it's unstressed, then we're going to reduce the thought sound to an eth. Jeg älskar þig. Here's another example. Fóru þeir heim. Fóru þeir heim becomes fóru þeir heim. Fóru þeir heim. Let's look at some more examples. Hún sá þá koma. She saw them come becomes hún sá þá koma. Hún sá þá koma. Hringdu þau í þig becomes hringdu þau í þig. Hringdu þau í þig. Did they call you? And I do want to make a comment before I go on to the next example that with every single one of these that we've seen, you would never actually write it the way that you're seeing on the right. I'm only writing it that way so you can see how it's supposed to be pronounced. But you're always going to write it the way that it looks on the left, which is the proper way to write it. This next example is a little bit of an exception, though. So the phrase is komið þið, which means are you coming, the plural form, which would become komið þið, komið þið, or just komiði. That's pretty common to pronounce it that way. Now for this one, people will actually write it this way, especially in text messages and things like that. But they'll actually write it the way it looks on the right, which is not true for all of these ones above it, and same with the rules that I went over for the letter how. All right, finally we're going to talk about the word thu, which is special in its own right, and you've probably started to notice this because it's very common even in writing. So when thu when it's unstressed and not at the beginning of the sentence, like in the phrase kemur thu, which means are you coming, we're going to also see some changes, but it's going to be a little bit more intense of a change than with the last rule we saw. This is going to become kemurðu, or sometimes just kemuru. So notice that there are two changes here. First of all, the thought changes into an eth, and we also lose the accent mark over the u, and it becomes an u vowel. So instead of saying kemurðu, we say kemurðu, kemurðu. And people will often write it this way as well, especially in more casual writing. Here's another example. Fórst þú heim, which means did you go home? This is going to become fórstu heim, fórstu heim. So again, this time we're just totally losing the thought sound, and it's because we already have that T there. And again, our U vowel is becoming an U vowel, and people will definitely write it this way. They won't usually write it as two separate words, fórst þú. They'll write it as one, fórstu. So with thu, it's a little bit special that way, that we actually smash the words together even in writing. All right, that's the rules I have for you in this video. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching. Bless, bless.